It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Hello. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? We got no time to talk. We've got two interviews. They both ran long. This is an author's showcase. We've got two authors up today. First one up is J.J. White, who wrote a book called Nisei. And the second author is Rayfield Walker, originally from Guyana, now lives in the United States. He has an autobiographical book called Out of the Jungle, which tells about rather horrific abuse that he endured as a child, but has moved on with his life and is now doing great things. He will be up in the second half of the show. So without further ado, here is J.J. White. Okay, now please welcome my guest, J.J. White. Hi, J.J. How are you?
Good, Douglas. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I was very interested in your book, Nisei. I wanted to talk more about that and find out why you wrote that and how you wrote that. Before I do, though, if you could give us just a little background on yourself so that people know who you are and what you've been doing for your life, and then we'll talk about your book.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you for getting the name of the book correct. You're the first one to do that.
Really?
You actually, yeah. Well, Nisei is difficult for anyone on the East Coast to pronounce. The West Coast is not too bad, but the East Coast it is. Well, I was born in Burlington, Vermont, and a lot of my books that I write take place in Vermont. And I was dragged screaming and kicking down here to Merritt Island, Florida. My father was in the space industry, so I was brought here very early in my life. But I'd always been curious and full of creativity, but then I also had a great curiosity. I used to take apart toasters and all kinds of appliances, and so I became an engineer. And so that put my writing on hold for a while. And I really didn't start writing again until around 2006. I had a tennis match with my daughter, and I hurt my back. So I was out on my back for 2 weeks, and I started writing again. And from that point on, I've been writing almost every day since about 2005, 2006. And I started writing novels, and I started writing short stories, entering them in competitions, and started winning some competitions. And I said, okay, well, maybe I do know how to write. And then I started getting a lot of publications, mostly short story publications, magazines, different anthologies, things like that. I've been in Sherlock Holmes Mystery Magazine, Saturday Evening Post anthologies, different anthologies, and my manuscript started winning competitions. Like Nisei won one in Columbus, Ohio, and one in Southwest Writers in Arizona, and pretty close to where you are in Nevada. And from that point on, I finally got a agent, Jeannie Loancano of Loancano Literary Agency. I queried her. She took my manuscripts and sold them to Black Opal Books. And from there, I had 3 books published. They were Prodigious Savant, Deviant Acts. Both of those were thrillers. And then I decided to write Nisei, a historical fiction, and I'll go into that later, why I decided to write this particular book.
Okay, now, according to your bio, you've written 8 novels and over 200 short stories. What was the time frame that you wrote all of that?
Again, since about 2006. If you talk to most writers, good writers, best-selling authors, people like that, what they'll tell you is you take your first 6 novels and throw them out, which is kind of what I did. It's kind of a learning process, very similar to a video game. When you write, you have to keep improving, keep getting better. And you can only do that by writing and by reading and by entering competitions and by selling short stories and all that. And so that's what I did. Of those 8 novels, when I wrote that, I had 8 novels, and I threw out 5 of them. And the other 3 were publishable, and they were published. And now the manuscripts that I write are usually pretty well cleaned up and ready for publication when I send them to the agent.
I did want to ask you about two of your other books, just because I really love the titles. Prodigious Savant, what is that one about, briefly?
Well, I really should have called it Acquired Savant, but the way that book got written, there was a story about a man in the 70s that went into a discotheque, and he got beat up when he came out, and the right side of his head was pummeled. And when he woke up, he was a math genius. And so he became what is called an acquired savant. A prodigious savant is someone that has savant abilities similar to, you saw A Beautiful Mind, different savants. You saw the one with Dustin Hoffman.
Rain Man.
And Rain Man, exactly, where he can do all these mathematical calculations. Well, in my case, I had a boy that was a teenager that was a typical boy in a high school, and he was injured in a construction site. And when he woke out of the coma, he had not just one ability for savant ability, but he had 5: mathematics, arts, music, chess, and all these different things. And basically it became a picaresque novel at that point, where you follow him in his sort of deterioration after that. The smarter he becomes and the more famous he becomes, the more dangerous he becomes. And so it was a thriller, but it was based on fact of prodigious savants. And most prodigious savants have social problems. They can't connect with people. They can just do that one thing. In my particular case, this protagonist was able to function socially too. So that was the original story, Prodigious Savant, and that was a popular book, actually.
Okay, no, I like the title, and I've always been kind of fascinated by the whole thing about savants, where, you know, there's so much untapped resource in our brain, and people who have been able, for whatever reason, to tune into one particular area or another. I've always found that very fascinating. You know, like you said, you know, what makes one person a great musician and the other one nothing? You know, can't carry a tune in a bucket. And it's just all of that part of the fascinating mind that fascinates me. The other one is called Deviant Acts. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Deviant Acts is almost a private investigator book, but essentially my brother, when he came back from Vietnam, and I had friends that came back from Vietnam, they had all these great stories, and I wanted to somehow incorporate them into a book. And so my protagonist is in the 1973 Charlotte, North Carolina. He's pretty much a loser, poster boy for losers, living at home. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's involved in sort of a My Lai massacre while he's in Vietnam, so he's kicked out. And pretty much nothing going on with his life. He's addicted to heroin. And he gets a call from his rich aunt in Shrewsbury, Vermont. And she's not a very particularly nice person. And she's rather much older than his mother, but she has a daughter at the University of Vermont who was kidnapped by SDS. I don't know if you know what SDS is, but these are Students for a Democratic Society, and they want $100,000, and they've cut her ear off and sent it to the mother. And so she wants to not only get back at these kidnappers, get her daughter, but she wants them killed. So she calls Jackson Hurst, my character, who is in Carolina, offers him money to come up and do just that, thinking because he's been involved in Vietnam and has all these PTSD problems that he'll do exactly what she says. And from there, it gets kind of crazy. And it's really a crazy book. And you can, I think the best review I ever got on it was a woman wrote a review, and she said she loved the book. She said that she sat down on the toilet just to read one chapter. And she said by the time she got off the toilet, she had a big red ring on her butt. So that was the best review. I had to take it off Amazon, but it was a good review.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Nisei. Now, what was it that inspired you to write that?
I think I was at a grocery store and I picked up either Reader's Digest or something, or maybe it was a PBS story. I forget exactly. Might have been back 2009. But I had heard about the Japanese Americans fighting in World War II, but just pretty much like everyone else, have no idea of anything about it. And I read the article in there, and the article fascinated me because it talked about the 442nd Regimental Combat Troop, which was a segregated Japanese-American regiment of about 4,000 men. And they were ordered up a hill in France to save the life of the 36th Texas National Guard. There's 270 men that were surrounded by 10,000 Germans on a hill in France. And the General Dahlquist had tried everything. He'd sent several regiments. He'd sent in bombardment, and these men were starving to death and were about to be killed by the Germans. And this was around 1944 October. And so, as a last resort, he ordered the 442nd Segregated Regimental Combat Troop, all Japanese Americans, up the hill in kind of a bonsai charge to save those 275 men. And in the process of it, they had over 1,000 casualties. But they did save the men. And I just said, I couldn't believe that, they were kind of used, in my mind, as cannon fodder, to go up there and save these white men. And back then, everybody hated the Japanese and the Japanese Americans. My father was in the war, and he hated them until the day he died. And that's the way it was in the military, too. But they were also the most highly decorated regiment in World War II. And they were the bravest. And there was a reason for that. It was their heritage. But and I was just fascinated by that. And I said, you know what? I'd love to write that story. And I looked around, and there really wasn't any fiction written about the Nisei soldiers, about the Hawaii Nisei. There was a million books on the nonfiction, but I couldn't find any on fiction. So I just sat down and did about 9 months of research and started writing.
And what kind of research did you do? Did you interview people that were actually interned? Quite a few that are still alive.
The research started out with the University of Hawaii. Dr. Ellen Tamura has a website on the University of Hawaii that did interviews with all the Nisei soldiers that were still alive back then, probably about 7 or 8 soldiers, and got their stories and put it online on the web. So I went through those and got their stories. And what I was going to do was try to take their anecdotes, their stories, and mix them all into a fictional character in order to look at the whole Nisei story from the perspective of one GI. So I did that research first using the University of Hawaii and using anything I could find on the web. And then after that, the libraries to get all the information I could. I did end up interviewing members of the 442nd that were still alive. I had 3 particular soldiers that I would interview either emails or on the phone because they're in Hawaii and I'm in Florida. So I wasn't able to, I did actually go to Hawaii, but I wasn't able to interview any there. And I took their stories and all that. Now, I also wanted to include the internment into the stories. You were talking about the internment camps. When President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, he essentially made it so that all the Japanese loyalists, Japanese natives, and Japanese Americans were arrested and sent to concentration camps on the continent in California, Oregon, Arizona, Nevada, different places like that. But in Hawaii, it was a little different. In Hawaii, they had 100,000 families that were Japanese Americans and Japanese natives. And the governor there would not allow Roosevelt to intern them because if he did, the economy of Hawaii would have collapsed. They were all the laborers. So only 10,000 families in Hawaii were interned. And so I wanted to put that in my story. So my protagonist's family, because of his involvement in the Pearl Harbor attack, he apparently drew the maps for the Pearl Harbor attack. And unfortunately, they got into the Japanese pilot's hands. And also his father had been sending material back to Hiroshima for years. And with that combined, they put him in internment camps starting in over in Santa Anita Racetrack and then Tule Lake and Manzanar concentration camps or internment camps. Now, I did talk to a couple of people that were internment camps, and the most recent one was Leela Sasaki. And she was there when she was in Tule Lake, which is where they put the kind of hardcore Japanese loyalists. She was there when she was 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. she read the book and she said, for a Irish white boy, you got it right. Everything about the camps that you wrote was correct. And she said, so she was very happy for that. And she thought it was an important book that people needed to read to remind them, especially in these times where there's a possibility with the Muslims that the internment camps could come up again, that she says is important that everyone read that. So I did have 2 or 3 people that I interviewed, and one couple I interviewed, both parents were California Nisei, and I'll explain what Nisei is, but California Nisei, and they were interned in two separate camps, even though they were in the same family. So all those stories helped in the writing of the book.
Nisei, I know, means second generation, right?
That's correct. They have what first generation is Issei, I-S-S-E-I, then Nisei's second generation, and those are they were born in America, so they're American citizens. The
right.
Issei couldn't be American citizens till around 1954. And then the Sansei, which I've talked to Dr. Tamura and also Linda Tamura, they're the Sansei, they're the children of the Nisei. And when I wrote Nisei, a novel, it's basically about one individual that was born in Hawaii in around 1920s, 23. And I take the book from Hawaii all the way through to his arrest, his internment in different camps, and then his enlistment. They finally allowed the Japanese Americans and Japanese Americans to enlist around 1943, early 44. And I take him through his enlistment in his battles through Italy, France, England, and on up into Germany. And then back to Hawaii to a girl. All my stories turn into love stories. So he wants to come back after proving his loyalty. His name is Hideo Bobby Takahashi. He wants to prove his loyalty and come back to a girl, his girlfriend, a secret girlfriend who's white, who he knows he could never marry. But he wants to come back to her.
Was there ever any cases proven that Japanese Americans were involved in any kind of spy activity or treason against the United States?
There were quite a few spies, especially in Hawaii. Most of them were not Japanese Americans, but Japanese loyalists, the Issei, and what they call the Kibe, which are people born in Japan, yet they live in the United States, but they're the same age as the Nisei. And as a matter of fact, I've done a lot of research on that. And yes, there were, especially involved in the ambassadors and things like that. And that was the problem. When we sit back now in the present time and we say, how could someone like Franklin Roosevelt, who is, extremely liberal and with a wife like Eleanor, how could he ever sign an executive order to do that? It's just not usually in his persona. But you have to be back in those times. It was the same way that everyone felt right after 9/11. You were angry, you were mad, you hated an entire people. And back then, right after Pearl Harbor, it was so unexpected that everybody hated him. My father enlisted the day after, and he and everyone else, they wouldn't allow Japanese Americans to enlist. And all of a sudden, they were actually considered the enemy. So you had to figure, the generals came to Roosevelt and they said, listen, they're going to attack the west coast of the United States. We're 99% sure that's what's going to happen next. We have to get all these spies rounded up. They call the hokuku, I believe is what they were called. We have to round them up. We can't possibly do it. We don't have enough FBI agents. We don't have enough people. The only way we can do this is to put them all in a fence and intern them. And they pretty much convinced Roosevelt that even though he regretted it till the day he died, they pretty much convinced him that was the only way they could prevent spies from helping out the Japanese invade the United States continent, was to incarcerate them and put them in internment camps. And that's exactly what they did, almost 400,000. And they were there until almost the end of the war.
And they lost everything. I mean, they lost their homes, their businesses, all their money, and they pretty much had to start over,
Well, yes, especially in the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California, where they had a lot of farms. In Hawaii, most of the people there did lose their houses, but they were there. they were there working on other people's property usually. But on the West Coast, it was pretty much horrible. Not only that, but when the soldiers came back from the war, even if they had their property and wanted to farm again, usually the towns were not receptive to them. There was a place in Mount Hood, Oregon, that I was recently reading about, and they had probably 20 Nisei soldiers, all won awards, Distinguished Service Cross. They weren't allowed to win the Medal of Honor. They didn't get upgraded to Medal of Honor until 2000. That's when Clinton gave them the Medal of Honor, including Senator Daniel Inouye. But anyway, when they came back, not only were they not accepted back into their towns, but they were forced to sell their property. And on any monuments that their names were on, their names were actually scratched off. And they did nothing but fight for our country. And you can imagine what it was like when they came back.
You made the comparison to the internment of the Nisei with the current situation with the Muslims. And people have made that comparison. I'm wondering if, in fact, it's an accurate comparison.
No, it's not really. But when you talk to Japanese Americans, they're very concerned about it because they've been through it, the ones that have been through it. The reason I don't think it's completely accurate now, it's because of the internet, because of Twitter, because of everyone can talk to everyone right now. And so you're not isolated. So you don't get that same jingoism or that same patriotism that you would normally. Now, if we had a nuclear attack somewhere up in a large city or something by an Islamic radicals, I don't even think it would happen then. But there is a possibility that at least some type of, not necessarily internment, but some type of prejudice against an entire group for the actions of a few. And the same thing happened in the 1900s with the Italian Americans. They had anarchists come over that wanted to socialize America, communist America, and they literally did the same thing. They blew up, matter of fact, Wall Street. 40, 50 people were killed in anarchist bomb in Wall Street in the 1910s, 1905. So I think that's what you have to be careful, is you can't label an entire people based on the actions of a few. And that's what happened with the Japanese and the Japanese Americans in the United States. Everybody was put together in internment. And back then, it not only was allowed, it was popular. Everyone in the United States, not everyone, but almost everyone agreed with the action.
Well, the United States then was a much more homogenous society than it is now.
Exactly.
It's pretty much impossible to get everybody to agree on anything.
Yes.
In this day and age, because America is such a diverse group of people. Back then, it wasn't. The only thing that I question about saying that it was, whether it be an accurate comparison or not, is the Japanese were essentially persecuted based on their national origin and their race because they were Asians. But the Muslims are being persecuted based on religion. And religion, to me, as much as we enshrine our freedom of religion in America, religion is still a choice. Your race and your national origin is not. And there's where absolutely. I draw the line. There's where I make the distinction. People can.
Absolutely. It's like oranges and apples. You can't really compare the two.
People can change their beliefs. I'm not saying that we should tell the Muslims to go change their beliefs. What I'm suggesting is that if people are throwing a group all together in a pile saying all these people are bad, they're doing it for a different reason. They're doing it because of something they believe rather than something that is part of their DNA.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think it will never happen. But you always have to be careful. We hope there's never another Holocaust either.
Right.
Basically anything. Right. So we just have to be careful. And the book was not written for that purpose. The book was written to show what did happen and to show how an entire population, or as you were saying, an entire race was blamed for the actions of the Japanese. And really, it wasn't fair. So it's a terrible thing. I mean, but then you have to put yourself back then in 1941.
Right.
And even though I say that, how would I have reacted at the time? I probably would have reacted the same way my father reacted and say, I'm going to enlist and going to kill every Jap I find. It's a sad story, but I'm looking at it from hindsight. There was a lot more involved in the persecution of the Japanese Americans than just internment camps and not letting them into the service. They had to endure quite a bit more than people think. As an example, I think the guy that plays Sulu, what's his name?
George Takei. Yeah.
He was in Thule internment camp as a child. So he always explains it much better of what went through with his family. And it wasn't as bad as the concentration camps, obviously, for the Jewish population, but it was still memorable, and they still don't want to talk about it. If you can get an interview with anyone from that time, you've had a great success. It's very hard to get them to talk about it.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up, because that was going to be my next point, was that I do know through friends of my family, 2 people that were actually in internment as children, and I had dinner with them. A group of us had dinner in L.A., and they were fairly forthcoming. I mean, they didn't go into a lot of the details of, what was it like. I mean, they were about 6 and 7 years old, respectively, when they were there. But they did talk about how they had all of this memorabilia and that they donated it all to the Japanese, I think it's Internment Museum or something in L.A. Mm-hmm. And they also brought up the Ronald Reagan when he finally signed the compensation, where everybody got $20,000. So the 2 of them were married. They got $40,000. They gave the money to the museum. They donated it.
Wow.
That was a very interesting dinner. But, I didn't get into, well, what was it like and what was your room like? I didn't go there. But they were very seemingly forthcoming as far as just talking about, we help with the museum and thing. And they knew George Takei. I guess he was part of that group that was doing something with the museum as well. It would have been interesting to go into a heavy interview, but, dinner time with, it wouldn't have been like, the right time, the appropriate time to do it. And I never kept up with them. I never followed up in any way. So
the children of the Nisei and the Issei, when they're young children that were in the internment camps, one of the fascinating facts I've learned from them is that it was not only an adventure, but they were, before the internment camps, the discipline for them was very strict, and the family unit was very tight. And once they got in internment camps, they started their own little groups and gangs and things like that. And the parents were very upset because they lost the discipline of the children at that point. Oh, so,
okay.
So you get a different point of view. And they'll usually talk about it, about being in the different events that happened at the internment camps. Whereas you talk to the adults about it, and when you have a machine gun constantly over your head, it's probably a lot different than with the way the children see it.
Yeah, I mean, they were Nisei, or they are Nisei. They're in their 80s now, but I think they're still alive and kicking. Their parents were from Japan. And I do remember him telling me one situation about once they got out and they had to start over again, it was hard enough for all of them to start over. But then the white kids would come and throw eggs at their house, and I guess that went on for years. So that kind of reaffirms what you were saying, that they had to deal with a lot of bullshit after the war, even.
Well, I'd say in my book, in one part where he says he starts talking through the memoir, and he says, "I am Nisei." He says it's 7 years after the war, and I'm still called a Jap, and so it's and he's very upset over that. The Hawaii Nisei were completely different than the California and Oregon Nisei. They had their own pidgin language. there were gangs, a lot of gangs in Hawaii, and they were very happy-go-lucky compared to the West Coast, where they were usually somber. So in the West Coast and the Oregonian and the Washingtonian Nisei spoke excellent English, whereas the Hawaiians, they spoke a pidgin language. So it was a different language altogether. So they had a clash of, and that's in the book too, the clash of cultures between the two Nisei, between the island Nisei and between the continental Nisei.
Well, JJ, we got to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. It was a nice conversation. Best of luck with all of your projects.
Let me give my website, at least, if people are interested in it. It's,
tell us the website.
It's jjwhitebooks.com.
Okay, super. All right, JJ, thanks a lot.
All right, Douglas.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! Ooh, don't know my own strength.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay, please welcome my guest, Rayfield Walker. Hi, Rayfield, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Douglas Coleman.
Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Your bio was sent to me by, I think, Barb Stefano.
Barb Stefano it is.
Yes, and I got to admit, it was shocking and disturbing, but interesting nevertheless. You wrote a book called Out of the Jungle, which we will talk about in a couple of minutes. Before we get to your book, though, I just want to do a little background on you so people kind of know who you are and where you came from and how you got to this place in your life. You were born in Georgetown, Guyana. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, I was born in Georgetown, Guyana.
Okay, now most Americans my age remember Georgetown, Guyana from the Jim Jones cult that was there in the late 1970s. Do you know about that?
Yeah, I've studied it in my history class, yeah.
Okay, because that's sort of our reference to
Guyana.
Yeah, if somebody says Georgetown, Guyana, somebody my age is going to say, oh, yeah, that was that Jim Jones cult that was there.
Definitely.
Where 900 people committed suicide or were murdered or whatever. But, yeah, that was a weird story. So, did you live near that place or what?
Well, Georgetown is the capital, and I was born in Georgetown. After I was born, I would say maybe 2 months. Because my mom was staying with my mom was staying with my dad's mother because as a result of some problem, my grandmother, which is my mother's mother, and her was encountering. So my mom ended up staying with my dad's mother, and for that 2 weeks, that's the only time I've considered to live in Georgetown. Beside those 2 weeks, I relocated with my grandparents, and from then I grew in the country area of a village that's called Supply, and that's on the east bank of the Demerara River.
Okay, tell us a little about Guyana. I know it's somewhat tropical. What goes on there? What kind of a country is it?
It's definitely a country it's a lot of carnival. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. It's called Mashamani, and it's a celebration of Guyana's independence, which is on the 23rd of February, and every February they celebrate the Mashamani. But in other Caribbean countries, they call it Carnival. So most people are familiar with the term Carnival than Mashamani. Another major thing that goes on there is cricket.
Oh, okay.
The West Indies team. Another important thing is the tropical rainforest, which occupies a large amount of the country. At least 65% of the country is occupied by rainforest.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, just so people have an idea, Guyana is on the northeast coast of South America. Is that correct?
Yes, on the northeast coast, yes.
Okay. All right. And it was British until independence. What year did Guyana become independent from Britain?
If I'm not mistaken, I think It was February 23rd, 1970. Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, so moving along, you had a pretty bad childhood from what I can gather from your bio. Your father was extremely abusive to you, and it turns out that he was a closet homosexual. Is that correct?
Correct.
How did you find that out?
Well, I gathered that information from people that he had shared that information with, which is my stepmother and my stepmother's brother, my stepmother's older brother, who was close friends with him in their young days. They attend the same school, and that's how my stepmom met my dad, through our older brother.
So he was closet homosexual, but he married your mother anyways.
He wasn't married to my mother. They were just together. They never carried the marriage.
Oh, they never
title.
got married. Okay, so
they never got married. It was only my stepmom that married him.
Oh, I see. Oh, well, okay. So your real mother never married your father.
No.
And then he married another woman who was your stepmother.
Which is my stepmother.
Okay. All right. I see. Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah. It's in total, it's 12 of us. 12.
12. Wow.
12.
These are all by the same father?
By all the same father? Yes.
Well, he did a pretty convincing job of not appearing homosexual, having 12 children.
Because in Guyana, that whole bisexual, the term gay, it's they don't treat it well. It's been if you consider to be homosexual or it's like you're condemned. Okay. No one has respect for you. So that was his cover up,
Right.
And to convince himself that I'm a real man and I could do what real man does. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So he had 12 children to prove it, is what it sounds
12 children
like.
to prove it.
Yeah.
So even if people could say, oh, he's bisexual, or he's homophobic, he could say, no, look how much kids I have. What do you have to prove?
Right.
So it would be a case, but when you gathered facts, and you have people confront him, they'll tell a different story.
So was he going out secretly and meeting with other men?
Yeah.
While having this family of 12 kids as well, yeah?
Yeah. Because it's not, the 12 kids has been, because my mom have 3 kids for him. My stepmom, she has 2 kids for him. And so it goes on. The girl that he's living with right now, she has 3 kids for him. So that's how the pattern goes.
Wow.
Not more than 3 kids per mom.
Well, 3's the limit per woman, yeah?
That's his way of pertaining to his responsibilities.
He still lives in Guyana?
No, he actually lives in Brooklyn. I live in the Bronx with my stepmom.
Okay, so, all right, I thought your father still lived in Guyana. So he lives in New York. Did you come to the United States with him?
No, my stepmom and him, well, they're currently married right now, but it's just that they're not living together because they didn't have a divorce. So my stepmom and him came together with, I think it was 5 of my siblings. And my stepmom was insisting, but she insisted on giving me the opportunity to come to the United States, to have better opportunities and stuff like that. And so they came in the year of 2007. They came in the year of 2006. And I came in the year of 2010.
Okay, but you don't live with them anymore, right?
I live with my stepmom. Yeah.
But not your father?
Not my father. My father, because they're separated. So I live with my stepmom in the Bronx, and my dad lives in Brooklyn. Okay.
Do you ever see him?
2 times a year. That's a lot if I see him 2 times a year. That's on occasion. The reason why I seen him because when I came through him. my stepmom had signed all the papers and everything. When I came, I was written down to come at his place. So I lived with him for a year, and the abuse continued, but it was like a man-to-man fight. So I ended up leaving. I ended up running away from his home and staying with my stepmom.
Okay. So, I mean, I can't imagine that your relationship with your father would be very good.
No, it's not. There are numerous times I've tried, because my stepmom always told me, you know, she said, you have to forgive, you know. She said, you'll be the better person, you know, you know better, you do better. Forget not to really like forget what he did, but put that behind you, forgive. And now you don't necessarily, she always say, you know, you don't necessarily have to forget, because remembering helps us to make better decisions in the future. So I've tried to reach out to him, and that's when I started. In the year of 2012, I started doing a lot of art, because I've used art to relate to demolish my pain, and I used to take it to show him, and sometimes he would push it aside, ask me when I'm leaving the house. And as far as me trying to build a relationship with him and he refusing to build one, I've just stopped going over there. And because I used to really go to see my siblings, my younger brothers, sisters, and I've just abandoned the whole situation and tend to focus on my career-wise and what's my expectation of what I've endured to require in life. Yeah.
Now, does he have any remorse at all to what he did to you?
No, it's not a topic that comes up pretty often. The only time it comes up is like, for instance, like I just told you, like I used to go and take my art and show him, and I would go back to my stepmom and she would ask me, how did it went with your dad? And I would tell her, you know, I said he didn't have no interest. So she would get upset, and she would call him and say, the boy is trying, you know, why you can't like pay attention to what he's doing and, you know, support him. And his words was, you know, he don't like boy kids, but then he got 3 other boys that he takes care of very fine.
Did he abuse any of the other kids?
As far as abuse, it's like, I mean, if you know you do something wrong, your parents spank you or something like that, you know. But it was never as bad as the abuse that he inflicted on me.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest boy, but I have a sister that's older than me.
Okay, but you're the oldest boy. All right.
I'm the oldest boy, yeah. And she and him get all the other kids and him get along. They go over there, they go over to his place, and they have a good time. Whenever he's throwing an event, whether it's a party or he's going out, all the other kids visit. I'm the only kid that just refused to go. I'm the only kid that's never been invited. At first, it used to really, because I used to be like, you know, what have I done this guy? You know, he's the one that's supposed to telling me sorry. You know, he's the one that's supposed to being on his knees. And after a while, you know, I just paid no mind. I just choose to move on with my life and do what's best for me.
I want to read this line that's on your bio, just so people kind of know what we're talking about. It says, during childhood, he suffered years of horrifying, repeated physical, sexual, and verbal abuse at the hands of his ashamed, closeted father, relatives, and neighbors. You had relatives and neighbors that were also abusing you?
Yeah, yes. This was at my grandparents' house. The abuse of relatives and friends, that was at my grandparents' house. And it occurred from, because we were, and at that time we was in a really, really drastically poor condition. So my uncle and we would always go over to his friends, because these boys was age group with him. At that time I was probably like 7 years old, 5, 6, 7. My uncle was he was 18. He was 18, so those were his friends. And he used to, when we have nothing to eat, he would go over to his friends, and you know, they had family in Canada, so they would always get like the fancy cookies. They would always get the fancy candies, chocolates, so things that we wasn't exposed to. And we would be like, what was that? Oh, that thing looks so nice. Can I have one? You know, the television, they had television set, something that we didn't have, you know, so it would always be, we going over there, you know, to experience that way of life that we never understand or that was unfamiliar to us. And sometimes I would go with my uncle, sometimes I would go without my uncle, you know, just to go over there. And it occurred one time, it was the first time I went over without my uncle. And that's when the sexual abuse started.
And this was from his friends that sexually abused you?
My uncle's friend, yeah.
Wow. Now, how long did that go on?
That go on. Well, that happened 3 times. That happened 3 times on 3 different occasions. Because the first time it happened, I tried to run away from the house, but they locked me into the house. And it was super hard after I left, after they let me go, to go and tell anyone. Because as I said before, it was something that was really looked down at in Guyana before. Because my uncle, I would always hear him talking to his friends, and they would always say, you know, the term that they use, it's famous as a Jamaican slang. The term that they use is called they say batty boy, you know. So a batty boy is a person who's gay, and in Guyana they wanted nothing to do with it. My uncle always say if he found that anybody is a batty boy, he's gonna kill them. He's gonna get rid of them. If it's his family, he don't want nothing to do with them. And my uncle was that only role model I had at that time, you know, because I would always be with him when I get home from school. I would always be relaxing with him. So I was so afraid to tell him, you know, because I fear that he is going to want nothing to do with me. Everybody's going to look at me as scornful. And the second time it had occurred, I was home. I was sitting on the steps because my uncle didn't came home as yet. So I had to wait until my uncle came to unlock the door. And while I was waiting on the steps outside, one of the brothers, he came over, because there's 2 brothers. That was my uncle's friend. And they said, one of the younger brother he was 17. No, he was 16. He came over and he said to me, he was apologizing, you know, but he said to me, you don't have to, was trying to tell me, you don't have to do it like that. You know, you could do it much better. And I said, I can't do it. You know, I was telling him I can't do it because my uncle said, you know, you're not supposed to do things like that. If he only find out that I did it, he's not gonna want anything to do with me. He's gonna disown me. My grandparents is gonna disown me. I have nowhere to live. And as 6 years old, I'm telling him that and I'm crying. And he just picked me up, iced me up, and just because we had in Guyana, we have the toilets, the restroom that's outside in the yard. And he took me into that restroom, locked the door up, and that's where it happened the second time.
Did your uncle ever find out that his friends were molesting you or abusing you?
No, he never found out. Never found out. I buried that emotion, and this whole book thing came up. Being at my stepmom's house, they always kept a family reunion every 2 years, and my stepmom's brother, who I told you was friends with my dad, that's how come my stepmom met my dad. His wife, she works for this guy by the name of Amos Poe. He's a professor at NYU. Also, he was an indie filmmaker in New York City, one of the first punk filmmakers in New York City. And I was interested in film because the reason how I got connected with her, she always heard about, you know, Rayfield and, you know, Shondel's, my stepmoms, you know, they would always hear about her son. So her stepson and this boy being abused by his dad. So the message would come up every now and then. Every now and then it was so bad that it came up. And she met me for the first time and she said, "What are you into and what are you doing?" She said, "I heard a lot about you, you know, how was things with you and your dad?" And I told her, you know, we don't speak, you know, he's always, you know, have an attitude, there's always a problem. So she asked me if I'm going to college. I said, yeah, I'm planning on going to college. I told her I like filmmaking. So she was like, yeah, you like filmmaking? She said she know this guy who's a filmmaker, and she gave me his number. I contacted him. So the decision that I had was to introduce my art and my poems and everything that I was writing, because I heard that he's a professor at NYU. NYU have a great film program. And I said, well, that's the focus now. That's what we're going to focus now, because that's where we're trying to go. And I met him. He told me, he said you could write an essay to get into it. You could talk about your past experience in Guyana, all the struggles that you've been through, and now America made those dreams possible. Things that you dreamed of that you wasn't able to accomplish. How the American dream, how you bring in this dream to life and making sense of to saying, okay, it's going to be real. And I started writing, and then I started telling him about the relationship with my dad and I, and I started getting into just a little bit of the abuse, sexual abuse. You know, my dad used to beat me, lock me in cupboard, lock me in the barrels, you know, in the drums. And he said, I don't only want you to write an essay. He said, when you finish writing this essay, write this book. When he said book, I said, book. I said, book. I said, I can't write a book. He said, trust me, you can write a book. He said, the biggest part is for you to start. He said, write down every single thing, you know, every important moments of your life, every sad, every tragic moment. And from that moment, I started thinking, and I forget that I was supposed to write an essay. And those little paragraphs that I started as an essay, I transformed those paragraphs into a larger story, started going in depth with it. And I've never finished that essay. And here I am with this book. And that's how I started. That's how the whole book thing came up.
So he was the one who inspired you to write the book?
He was the one who inspired me to write the book, yeah.
Okay. And how long ago did you write the book?
Well, the book is published a month ago. I was working on this book for the past 5 years. Because the one important thing that I don't think I've mentioned it into the book, but when my stepmom told me she wanted me to get the opportunity to come to the United States, I said, yeah, that's great. And she said, how are you doing in school? So I told her, I said, I don't know, because at that time, at the age of 12 years old, I couldn't have read. I didn't know how to read. And that was as a result, because my grandparents used to wanted me to go to school. They used to send me to school, but I was solely focused on, because as a result of like blackout and we not having food to eat, I would always come home. I would always leave school early. I would just go, make sure they mark my attendance to show that I'm in school. So when my grandmother called and they said, oh, was Rayfield in school? Yes, he was in school, because the attendance shows that he's in school. But I would leave early, go work for those neighbors so I could get money to buy bread, buy little stuff like water, you know, so we could have things to think of. Those things my grandparents could afford, but we had so a little bit of it, so that it was terribly bad, you know, because I remember eating 2 slices of bread and leaving the house, and for the rest of the day you're hungry.
Yeah, 2 slices of bread for the whole day, that doesn't quite make it.
I remember I used to eat the bread and I used to go back into the bag and shake out the crumbs, and you know, the crumbs used to fill a few gaps, you know. And right now, you know, looking back and saying, you know, I don't think I'm going to eat the crumbs, but back then, you know, the crumbs used to satisfy me. At the age of 12, she said, you got to learn how to read, because she said, you can't come to the United States and you can't read. And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, then I'd sit down and I started trying to mumble words. They used to make fun of me. They used to say I read like I pick corn, because I was always say one word. I used to take like, you know, a really long time to just read a few sentences. And at the age of 15, when I came here to the United States, I was able to read, not quite fast, not at a fast pace, but I was still picking corn, as they said, but I didn't understand what I was reading. And while attending Brooklyn College Academy, there's a woman that worked there. She really helped me a great lot. She used to have me reading those papers, and any word that I didn't understand, she would have me write down the word, research the word, the vocabulary meaning of the word, and then remake sentence using that word. That changed everything.
What is your impression of the United States? If you had to tell somebody who had never been here and was looking to come, what would you tell them about it?
Definitely, I'll tell them America is a very, very beautiful country. It's extremely beautiful. And I used to really judge a lot of people that lived and grew here. A lot of friends that I've met in school that condemn the country. and saying, complaining about this and complaining about that, whether it's the government, whether it's how the school system is set up. And I've tell them my story saying, when you're in a country and you have nothing, whether you're in school and because in high school, when you're in high school, you get free lunch. If you like in high school, I used to get free lunch in America. I used to get free lunch because my stepmom wasn't working for a lot of money, so you get free lunch. You could go to school, you could get breakfast. You're being well taken care of. Books, you don't have to pay for the books. They give you the books, and people is supportive. You go to tutoring. People is willing. People is engaging in what you have to do. Everything is the dream. It's not impossible. It's all about you. It's who wants it more. And when I came here and I saw all of that, I was able to reflect different from how the kids that was born here that was reflecting, because I know what it felt to not have any of those things. And when you migrate or you move to another country and you experience all those givens, it makes you see things differently. And it's like I'm at work and whether I could be at work, I could be in a meeting with people, and I'm always talking America, success, the dream is real, opportunities, and people say, what are you talking about? It's just luck. And I tell you, it's not luck. I've never happened to walk into the hands of all the right people. I said I was just persistent and I never gave up. And no matter how much times I fall off, I went on the wrong track. I'm just willing to be true to myself, to say, I'm going to be somebody regardless of where I came from. And I'm just going to be the best person I could be. And how you start by doing that is putting your best foot forward and thinking positive. In the morning when I get up, I listen to the song that inspired me. I think about where I see myself in the next 2, 3, 5 years. And that inspired me. I go to work. People ask me why I'm smiling. I said, I woke up this morning, I'm much better than I was in my past, in my country, so all those things is inspiring, and that's, America brought all that joy to me.
Wow, that's beautiful.
America brought all that joy. Yeah.
It's nice to hear it because, like you said, the people are complaining and moaning about everything. And it's nice to hear that there is still the great opportunity here. That's what built this country. And people have said that, it's not the way it was anymore. But there is opportunity. It's the greatest country in the world for somebody who's willing to work hard and to push, and they can get what they want. Well, the book is called Out of the Jungle. The author is Rayfield Walker. Rayfield, we got to wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people get the book? Where can people buy it?
The book is available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon Prime. It's available on Barnes & Noble. It's available, as I said before, it's on Amazon Prime, Barnes & Noble, iBook. It's on Span. It's on Books A Million, Bookwire, Baker and Tyler, Ingram Book Company, and buy.com. Yeah.
Basically everywhere.
Yes.
Do you have a website that you want to mention so people can come and check you out?
Well, I don't have a website, but I have a web page, which is connected with Outskirts Press, because that's where I publish the book through Outskirts Press. So yeah, once you go to Outskirts Press, they'll give you an option where you could look up the authors and just type in Rayfield Walker, and you'll find
your profile there.
Yeah, you'll find our profile right there.
Okay, so that was Outskirts Press?
Yes, Outskirts Press.
Okay, and then just do a search for Rayfield Walker?
Rayfield Walker, yes.
All right, okay, super. All right, Rayfield, we got to wrap this up. Thank you again for coming on the show. Your story was incredible. But in the end, it's an inspirational story. And I think that people should take note of that. Yeah. That through all of the tragedy, something good can come out. It sounds like you certainly are on the right road. Best of luck to you. And I know you're going to be a success.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for reaching out to me.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guests, J.J. White and Rayfield Walker. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye.